So this is the economics section of GED Social Studies. A lot of students say, oh, I hate economics, I'm no good at economics. They're actually scared of economics. The economics section isn't really complicated. Indeed, it's discussing things that you already know, but maybe it's putting terms in it like cost-benefit analysis or opportunity cost. You know these concepts, you actually use them in your daily life every day. It's just these terms are difficult for you. So let me try and go through it carefully. That first sentence, economics is the continuous exchange of goods, services and resources. That's a fairly scary sentence. All it's really saying is economics is about when you buy and sell things. They might be bars of chocolate in a shop, that might be services, you pay for a teacher. It might be resources, you pay for your water or you pay for your electricity. Everything's got a cost. It might not be a money cost or a money alone cost. The cost might be your time. But often it is a money cost. What is good value to one person may not be good value to another. Some people love chocolate and will pay a lot to buy and eat chocolate. Other people don't really like chocolate. I don't like Blackpink. Everyone in Myanmar seems to love Blackpink. So I would not pay anything to go to a Blackpink concert, but you might pay everything you've got to go to a Blackpink concert. This phrase, cost-benefit analysis, that a lot of you are scared of. What does it mean? I don't understand. You use it every day when you go shopping. You go into a clothing store and you look at a shirt. Do I like it? Yes, I like it. Can I afford it? Yes, I can afford. I've got enough money to buy it. But if I do buy it, maybe I can't buy something else. Maybe I can't afford the bus journey home. Maybe you can afford it and you have enough money to get the bus home. So your next question is, okay, I can afford it, but do I really want to pay $10 for this shirt? Is it really worth $10 to me? Now you're using cost-benefit analyzing. You're thinking, if I spend this $10 on this shirt, then I have $10 less left. So I'm without this $10. Maybe I could have spent this $10 on something more useful, more enjoyable. You are weighing the benefit of owning the shirt with the cost of owning the shirt. And you are trying to decide whether the cost of the shirt is worth it or not. You are undertaking a cost-benefit analysis. When you are saying to yourself, okay, I could afford the shirt, but if I don't buy the shirt, maybe I could use the money to buy something else. Maybe there's a pair of trousers that you like. If you buy the shirt, you can't buy the something else. So there's an opportunity cost. If you buy the shirt, the cost to you is $10, but the cost to you is also the lost opportunity. You don't have the opportunity to buy something else. This is the cost-benefit analysis that you will do when you are shopping. But imagine that you are the business that makes the shirts. You also will do cost-benefit analysis when you're deciding whether you want your business to be making shirts or maybe doing something else. The first question of a business is, will I make a profit if I produce this shirt? If you don't make a profit, then there is no point in producing the shirt. You can't afford to produce the shirt because you won't make a profit doing it. So you're saying to yourself, are all the costs in making this shirt lower than the price that I can sell it for? You are cost benefit analyzing in the other way round. Maybe you could make a profit selling the shirt, but if you made something else, maybe you made trousers instead, could you make more profit? If you use this machine to make shirts, you cannot use the machine to make trousers. So there is an opportunity cost. If you use the money to buy the shirt machine, then you can't, then you've used your money. You can't use that money to make something else. When you choose a job, there will be a cost benefit too. Could I use my time doing a job that paid me more? If you could find another job that paid you better than this job, then maybe you would take that. If you're doing this job, then you cannot do another job. So there is an opportunity cost. A job isn't just how much money you make, it's how much you enjoy the work, how much you enjoy the friends that you work with. If you go and do a job that pays you more money, then that's a benefit, but you might not see your friends. So you're doing that cost benefit analyzing, trying to choose your job. When you are running a business, you're one of these cogs in the economy that produce goods or they produce services. And the way that entrepreneurs produce goods and services is they find people to work for them, and they use capital. They use their money, their wealth. Maybe they have to borrow it to buy the machines, to buy the factory, to buy the office, to buy the computers. And they have to pay the labor a salary. The labor are the workers, and the work that they do is the labor that they do. Labor is usually rewarded with wages. Sometimes, maybe more often in the West, there are other benefits that you come with the wages. You might get free healthcare. You might get paid holidays. You might get free lunch. Sometimes you can even get a free car. Capital is the money that you need to use to get the business going. It is the assets, the money, the buildings, the land that you might own, the equipment, the inventory. And the reason that you will use these assets is in the hope and the expectation that you will get a profit from it. Capital. Capital is a big word that has so many meanings. In this case, capital is the wealth that is used to finance the business. I'm going to run through some other words that you might see in a GED social studies question. Comparative advantage. If I have a factory that produces shirts in the UK, and you have a factory that produces shirts in Myanmar, I think that you may find that you have a comparative advantage over me. The advantage you have is that in Myanmar, you can hire people to make shirts for you. Your labor is very cheap. So when you produce shirts, the people that are used, your labor are expensive. In the UK, it's very expensive to hire somebody. People's salaries are very high. People in the UK can sometimes be a little bit lazy as well. They don't like to work long hours. Whereas in Myanmar, you all work very hard. You all work long hours and you all have low salaries. So your factory making shirts in Myanmar is likely to be much more profitable than mine because the costs to me of making a shirt are much higher. And actually, you'll find that shirts tend to be that many more shirts are made in countries with low wages like Myanmar or Bangladesh than in the UK. Productivity, that simply means output per labor. So if Jane can make 3 shirts every hour, but Peter can only make 2, then Jane has higher productivity. Her productivity could be higher for a number of reasons. Maybe Jane is a harder worker. She concentrates and gets her shirts made, whereas Peter is a little bit lazy. Maybe Jane has a much better machine than Peter, and so she's able to make her shirts more quickly. Entrepreneurship. The word entrepreneur is a French word. Entrepreneurship is the skill of being able to run successful, profitable businesses. If somebody is great at this, the founder of Google or Facebook or Apple, they've started a business that's become really successful. They are great entrepreneurs. They have entrepreneurship. Incentive. This is when you give something to encourage people to do something. So in the UK, we want to make the world cleaner. So if a factory switches from oil to power their machines to solar power to power their machines, the government might charge them lower taxes or might even give them a free gift as an incentive. Specialization. So what a lot of companies in the West do nowadays is they focus just on one small area where they feel like that they can do it better than anyone else. If they focus on lots of different areas, maybe they're using their efforts in somewhere where they're not the best. As a teacher, you might think, I'm going to specialize in teaching IELTS. It's what you are best at, and everyone wants to learn IELTS. So I'm just going to do IELTS. You can make the most profit if you focus on what you're best at and where you think the demand is. Other businesses go completely the opposite way. I would argue it's not the right answer. In Myanmar, you see a lot of cronies with their conglomerate businesses. They like to own an airline and a bank and a food company. They have lots of separate businesses. Maybe they think, well, sometimes you make lots of money with your airline. Sometimes you make more money with your road. So depending on the economic environment, one business is doing okay. That's called a conglomerate, a business with lots of different things that are not really related. Bankruptcy. If your debts are very high and you can't pay it back, then you declare bankruptcy. You say, I'm sorry, I cannot pay you back. Then what the bank will do is it will through a legal process, it will take your assets and it will sell them and try to raise as much of the debt as they can. Balanced budget. This is when the business is earning an income that is equal to or above its expenses. If you're running a business, if your expenses are higher than your income, then unless you do something, maybe you need to fire some workers, or maybe you need to move to a cheaper place to rent, your business will go under. You need to balance the budget. You need to make sure that your income is at least equal and preferably much higher than your expenses. Otherwise, it cannot survive. Balanced budget. There are two kinds of economics, microeconomics and macroeconomics. Microeconomics is the study of small things, so one business, one individual or group of individuals, and how they behave. Maybe it's a business that makes just one thing only, and what is the cost of it? What is the demand for it? What is the price that you set of it? Markets will operate on a law of supply. Sorry, I've spelt supply wrong. It should be S-U-P-P-L-Y, supply and demand. Supply is how much of that good is available. How many shirts can you make? Demand is the amount of of that item that consumers want to buy. How many shirts are the consumers going to buy? The level of supply depends on how many machines, how much labor you have in your factory or factories. Demand depends on a lot on price. If the price of the shirt is low, people will want to buy a lot of it. If the price is high, they might want to buy less. As a businessman, what you're trying to do is you're trying to supply as much of the shirt as you can as cheaply as possible. And then you're trying to sell the shirt as expensively as possible, but you want to sell all the shirts. So you will set your price where the supply of shirts, the number of shirts that you can manufacture every week, equals the demand for shirts, the number of shirts that you can sell every week. If demand goes up, maybe your shirts become very fashionable, you can put your price up because your supply will stay fixed. If your shirts go out of fashion, people don't want to buy them anymore. Or if maybe somebody else is selling a shirt that looks just like yours, and so people are buying his shirt and not yours, your demand will go down, and then you would have to cut the price of your shirt. The price of your shirt would always need to be higher than the cost of producing your shirt, otherwise the business would fail. Microeconomics. Here we have the supply and demand for chocolate. This is just a make-up chart that we have here. And you can see on the two axes, you've got the equilibrium price, and you've got the price of chocolate, sorry. You've got the price of chocolate and the quantity of chocolate. And you can see here there's a supply curve. So the higher the price of chocolate is, the more that you will supply. If everyone wants to buy chocolate and they're prepared to pay a high price for it, then you'll open more factories making chocolate. Other people will open more factories making chocolate, and the supply of chocolate will go up, as you can see on the green curve. But demand for chocolate will vary in the opposite direction. The lower the price of chocolate, the more people will want to buy it. If the price of chocolate is very high, you won't be able to afford to buy it. Maybe doing your cost-benefit analysis, you'll choose to buy another kind of sweet or another kind of food, or maybe you'll give up chocolate entirely. As the price falls, you'll be more inclined to buy chocolate. And here you can see what we call the equilibrium price. So if the price of chocolate is very high, you can see that the supply curve goes up as the price goes up, but the demand curve goes down. So if at a very high price of chocolate, supply would exceed demand. If the price of chocolate is very low, everyone wants to buy it, but people won't be so keen on making it. The equilibrium is where the supply curve and the demand curve meet, as you can see with the red dot. Where that red dot is will vary because tastes change. The cost of producing chocolate might change. And so the supply and demand for the price of chocolate will go up and down over time, depending on other factors. So in a market-based economy, like in the UK or in the US, the companies, whether they're both big and small, will sell goods and services. They will hire people and pay them salaries. They will buy raw materials. They'll buy equipment. They'll buy, or maybe they'll simply buy goods that are already been made. A car showman will buy a car that's already been made, and then his store will simply sell it. A shop will resell goods. When they sell their product or their service, the aim is to make money, is that the revenue that they get, the income that they get, is higher than their costs. And this is the profit. When the profits are won, they can be used to reward the owners. Maybe they pay extra to loyal workers. Or they think, okay, I'm not going to spend that money. I'm going to use it to build another factory, to open another shop, to expand the shop, when you're in a business, you always have to be aware of the fact that there's likely to be more than one seller. Not always more than one seller. We'll come on to that in a moment. But there's going to be someone else that's trying to sell shirts, maybe in the shop next door to you. And so you've got to compete to attract buyers by making sure that your price is low enough and your quality is high enough that they choose your business, not the other seller's business. The seller will be doing the same thing to you. And quite often you get to a kind of balance where both sellers are selling something at very similar prices and very similar quality. Sometimes there is no competition and only one company supplies a product. That's called a monopoly. A monopoly is where there is only one person that you can buy from in that business. Monopoly. Investment. Again, this is a big word. And in this case, in GED, social studies, when you're thinking about investment, this is when you use your money on new equipment or to invest in research and development to make your product better. You're investing in the business. If you buy a house and you hope that the value of that house will increase in value, that is an investment too. Another investment is that in the US particularly, and in the UK too, is many people buy stocks or shares in companies or bonds as an investment. A stock or a share or an equity, they all mean the same thing. A stock allows you to own a tiny piece of a company. So, for example, if you wanted to be an owner of Apple, you could own a very small piece of Apple, and you could do it immediately on the internet. You can go in and you can buy one share of Apple. And the price I've got here is $177.79. I think maybe it's changed a bit since I wrote this presentation. But once you've got that, you own a tiny little slice of the company. A bond is where a company wants to borrow money. And so what the company will do is they will give you a bond. And what that bond says is that over a period of time, maybe 10 years, maybe 5 years, maybe any period of time, set period of time, they will pay you a small amount of interest. And then after that time period is up, they will pay you back that amount of money. It's called a bond. Companies do it, and governments also do it. They issue bonds. But when a company gives you a bond, that's just a loan. You don't own a share of the company. You've just lent them some money. Here you can see that if you had bought Apple in 1993 or in 2003, if you had spent $100 on buying Apple shares in 2003, today you'd be very wealthy. Today, your $100 would be worth $63,400. They don't all go up. Sometimes they go down. And as we'll learn about in the crash of 1929, lots of people were investing in stocks, in shares, in the hope of doing what Apple's done, but actually it went in the other direction. They lost everything. Another thing, just a small thing, is that companies, as well as you can be rewarded because the value of the share that you bought goes up, companies also can sometimes pay dividends to shareholders, where every 3 months, every year, they'll pay you a little bit of money for being a shareholder. That amount, that dividend will depend on how profitable the company is, how much of the profits the management decide that they're going to give shareholders versus keep in the business, invest in the business. We've talked about microeconomics. Now we're going to talk about macroeconomics. Macroeconomics is looking at an overall economy or even the world economy. Looks at what countries do, what they produce, how they trade. You might look at the wealth of the country. You might look at GDP, gross domestic product, which is pretty much similar to how much they produce each year of wealth. Inflation, how much prices are rising or falling. Currencies, is the chat going up or down against the dollar? Interest rates, if you have money in the bank in chat, what's the interest? If you have money in a US bank in dollars, what's the interest? Debt, how much do you owe? How much does the country owe? Countries have a habit of spending more than actually they have. So the debts of the countries go up and up. Unemployment. Unemployment is how many people are out of work and want to work. The level of unemployment. If the economy is booming, unemployment is very low. If the economy is struggling, unemployment tends to be quite high. There are people looking for jobs, they can't find them. And government economic policy. So government has lots of policies, but one of their most important policies is economic policy. How are they going to stimulate the economy if the economy is very slow? How are they going to slow down inflation if maybe the economy is growing a bit too fast, prices are rising? How can they deal with this situation where there are very rich people and very poor people? How can they make it more balanced to give poor people more of an opportunity? So gross domestic product. This is a measure of the total amount of goods and services produced in a period, normally a year. What's your GDP per year? Sometimes we divide it by the number of people in the country, so we can see what GDP per capita. What's the average amount of wealth produced each year? Inflation, levels of increase or decreases in prices. If prices are falling, we call it deflation. Interest rates. When you save money and you put it in the bank will pay you a level of interest. When you borrow money, you pay interest as a charge for borrowing money. The level of interest, whether you're saving or you're borrowing, is called the interest rate. Unemployment, people who don't have a job. Government economic policy, what the government does to manage the economy, taxation, budgets, monetary policy. Banking. The basic job that a bank does, we call it checking and savings. So what that checking is if you're using your bank, so maybe you're on your card, you're using your savings in the bank to buy things in the shops. And then you give the shop your credit card, or maybe you write it a check. If you're using your credit card or you're writing it a check, and then it goes back to the bank, and then the money that was in your account then goes to the shop's account. That's checking. Savings is you want to put your savings in a safe place, and maybe you want to earn interest on it. The bank will look after your savings in a safe place, and they will provide you with a small interest every month as a thank you for letting them look after your savings. Sometimes you don't have savings. Sometimes you might want to borrow money. It could be a loan or it could be a credit card. The banks will provide loans and they will provide credit cards, and they'll charge you interest for doing that. Usually rather higher rates of interest than they will give you on your savings. So checking is paying for things directly from your bank account. Because in the olden days, people wrote checks to buy things, which we don't really do now. You might use a card, your debit card or your credit card to do that. Money remaining in the savings account usually earns interest. So the way that banks make money is they might charge you a fee to have an account with them. They offer loans and mortgages and credit cards and charge high rates of interest for the money lent. But the money that they're lending is usually the money that other people have given them as their savings. They have to pay those people for the savings that they've given them, but generally they pay a much lower rates of interest. So if the people pay, if the savings accounts earn lower rates of interest than the bank enjoy from lending that money, that's the difference that the money makes. One dangerous thing for banks is that they need that money in the savings accounts because they've lent it to other people. If all the people with savings accounts suddenly think, "Oh, we don't want to have our money in this bank's savings account anymore," and they suddenly try to withdraw it, the bank are stuck because they can't give the money back to them because they've used a lot of it by lending it to other people. And then the bank goes bust. We call it a run on the bank. So when you choose a bank to put your money with, don't just go to the bank that pays the highest interest. Go to the safest bank, the one that is least likely to go bust. There are different kinds of economy. In a capitalist economy, business and industry are owned by private entrepreneurs. They run the business to make profits. They employ people in those businesses to work. Those people in the businesses, they care about their wages. They want their wages to be as high as possible. And when the businesses make things, their customers, they want high quality and they want good value, which means low price. So the three, the business owners, the workers, and the customers are all kind of working against each other. And prices and wages are decided by this competitive market. Business owners wanting high profits, workers wanting high wages. The workers can't get wages that are too high because the business owners know that for every extra dollar they pay in wages, their profits go down. So there is an argument between the two and they have to come to a decision. The customers, they want high quality products than low prices, but the business owners want high profits and the workers want high wages. So they have to fight against each other to get to the right price. This is the competitive market. In a socialist or even a communist economy, the government owns all the businesses, so prices are fixed artificially. Socialists or communists believe that the business owners in a capitalist economy tend to do very well, but the workers don't do very well. And sometimes the customers don't do very well either. So much better that the government owns the businesses. And then the price can be decided by what is sensible, what's good for the country, not this competitive market. A mixed economy is a combination of both. The US has a largely capitalist economy, but actually European countries can be more mixed. For example, in the UK, our health service is almost entirely owned by the government. And we have free health, and we pay for that with our taxes. A lot of our education is government owned as well, free education. You sometimes find in European countries that things like your electricity provider or your rail company could be owned by the government. But in European countries, most of the economy is more capitalist. The US is a very important part of GED, so you want to think about the US government perhaps more than any other. The US government is both a central government, so Washington, the president, so at the federal central level there's government, but there's also state and local government, and they get involved in the economy as well. Both at a central and at a more local level, taxes are used to pay for the services they provide. If the money raised from taxes isn't enough to pay for everything, they issue bonds to make up the difference. Remember, we talked about bonds before. Bonds are a bit like borrowing money. So the US government have their bonds. You can buy US government bonds. People like US government bonds because it's a pretty safe investment. They're always going to pay you back. Taxes are, the most common forms of taxes are income taxes. So a portion of your salary is taken in tax each month, maybe 25, 30% tax. And then there's a sales tax where on some goods, not on everything, when you buy that good, you have to pay tax on it. In the UK, we call it value added tax, but there's a sales tax. The federal government have to raise taxes to pay for all their employees, for the army, for the police, education. In the US, healthcare is not free for everyone, but for a lot of people it is. There's a program for elderly people called Medicare that provides free healthcare. Poor people also have something called Medicaid, which also provides free healthcare. But if you're not poor or old, or if you are poor and old, but for some reason you don't qualify for Medicare or Medicaid, you have to pay. Final thing the US federal government have to spend their taxes on is looking after national parks, arts and scientific research, and to help maintain the national transportation system. At the state and local level, they have to look after their own state police force, their state employees, the bridges and highways in their states, local public schools, garbage collection, libraries and municipal parks. So on top of your federal state to the central government, instead of your taxes to the central federal government, your state and local level, they may also want you to pay tax. The central government regulates the economy by setting interest rates. And they have an independent body called the Federal Reserve Board, and they will set the appropriate interest rate for the economy. If the economy is in a deep recession, it will be low. If the economy is booming and inflation is getting high, they will raise interest rates. And they will also regulate businesses in how they can operate. Avoidance of monopolies, because monopolies tend to lead to unfairly high prices for the consumer, making sure that businesses operate with good health and safety. Businesses have to pay minimum wages. That they can't cheat the workforce. There's a minimum amount that they have to pay in a salary. They have to make sure the workplace is a safe place to work, and they're not allowed to have child labour. State governments, as you know, which I've mentioned before, can raise taxes. They can also enforce their own minimum wage rules, which might be a little bit higher than the minimum wage that the national government set. The government is also very interested in international trade, exports and imports. A country wants to be exporting at least as much as it imports. Some aren't very good at that. Some are brilliant at it. If you are a country which has lots of oil reserves, like Saudi Arabia, then you're in a very good position to have far higher exports than imports. And more exports than imports means wealth coming into the country. Other countries, like Myanmar once upon a time, was very good at growing rice, the biggest rice producer in Asia. Great opportunity to export. Some countries are attractive to tourists. The UK. Others have great music and sport. Again, the UK. A country will try to find something that it's good at, or it has a surplus of. Then they can export that in return for other things that they don't have but they need. If you have a trade surplus, it means you've got more exports than imports. If you have a trade deficit, it means you have more imports than exports. Colonization. This is when a powerful country acquires a colony. Great Britain acquiring Myanmar. It's not doing it on a fair point of view because it wants to control the trade relationship. It will consume your commodities and resources, but it won't reward you fairly for it. So we would use Myanmar to strip them of teak and copper. We would probably grow tea and coffee, and we certainly would want to take away your precious stones. And we misuse, and colonial powers tend to do that. We tend to misuse the colony that we've acquired, because if you are a colony, you've got no bargaining power. If you are independent, well, you have all the bargaining power. There's a great power to trade. If a nation is your enemy, then it might refuse to trade with you. If you have a nation that produces something that you really want, sometimes if they do bad things, you might look in a different direction. You might pretend that you haven't seen it because you want them to keep trading with you. If another nation has a rare commodity and you need it, you don't want to be its enemy, unless, of course, you can defeat it and acquire it as a colony. If you are in dispute with a country, you can place an embargo on it. An embargo means you block exports and imports on the country. So the US has a dispute with Russia at the moment, and it places lots of embargoes on trade with Russia. It stops the trade with Russia. It blocks exports and imports. During the US Civil War, the British placed an embargo on the Confederates. In the Civil War, the British were anti-slavery, and they wanted the Confederates to lose the Civil War, which they did. And to make life more difficult for the Confederates, they refused to buy their cotton and their tobacco and other goods. They placed an embargo on it. In early American history, the government had little involvement in economic affairs. It was really just a small collection of farms. But as the economy became larger and more sophisticated, the government needed to get more involved. In 1791, and as you know in GED, you don't need to learn these dates, they set up the Bank of the United States, the central bank. Some anti-federalists, like Jefferson, opposed the idea. And not long after, it was sold to a private buyer. There's lots of controversy. How much should the government interfere in the economy? In early US history, it was all about being free to do your own thing. A lot of people came to America to break away from the controlling European, English and other European countries. But actually, as the economy became more sophisticated, some control was needed. In 1824, the Supreme Court ruled that under Article 1 of the Constitution, Congress could regulate interstate commerce. So there's some control here. But actually, if the different states were trading with each other, you needed someone to manage it and to set rules. The court also said that states could not interfere with the use of harbours and rivers. America grew from, as you remember, from the east coast and grew westwards and grew southwards. But there's this big growth westwards. And railroads became a very important way of transporting goods and people long distances. Settlers moved west to the Midwest and then the Great Plains. And then in California, gold was discovered. And with this move, trade between the states expanded enormously. So by the second half of the 19th century, the 19th century is the 1800s, the second half of the 19th century, there was a lot of railroad building, and lots of industries like steel and coal grew rapidly as the US economy became much larger and much more sophisticated and much more industrial. So by the late 19th century, you had a much bigger, more sophisticated economy. And so you really needed some form of control. Farmers, business people, and workers all wanted a government that could regulate the economy. So we've got three acts here. The Interstate Commerce Act, 1887, allowed Congress to regulate interstate trade in the railroads. 1890, and you don't need to learn all of these, but you might be asked questions where they're talked about in them. But remember, you don't need to learn this is what this act is and when it was and what it means. Just when you see it in an exam, you might think, the more familiar you are with it, the easier you will find the question to answer. The second one, the Sherman Antitrust Act, 1890, gave Congress the power to limit the establishment of business monopolies. Monopolies where one owner owns a business and has no competition at all. They can charge very high prices, and it can be pretty unfair on the consumers. So the Sherman Antitrust Act was something that gave Congress the power to stamp on these monopolies and try and make sure that they didn't either that they were given competition or that they were managed so they didn't charge prices that were too high. And then finally, the Federal Reserve Act, which created the modern banking system in 1913. After World War I, life got really good in America. It got so good that people just thought it would never end. It was so good they called it the Roaring Twenties. The war was over, life was getting better, banks all were happy to lend money to you, everyone felt confident, and everyone felt it would go on forever. The economy boomed. The stock market, you remember the price of Apple that went from your $100 turned into $63,000 in 20 years, made lots of people rich. They invested in things like railroad companies, and lots of people had ideas of this company, buy shares in this company. It's going to make you so wealthy. And because everyone was buying shares, share prices went up and up and up, and everyone got so confident about it. People even went to the bank and borrowed money, not to buy a house, but to buy more shares with that borrowed money. And then suddenly, almost like overnight, no one could understand it. It collapsed. Why did it collapse? Everything was looking so good. Maybe it collapsed because everyone had bought, so there was no one else left to buy the shares. Everyone had put all their money in, but it collapsed, and it was so sudden that it took America and actually the whole world by storm. People who had got super wealthy were suddenly bankrupt. And as the stock market fell, it brought the economy down. And everyone was hurt. The economy went from boom to bust. People had borrowed money, but they couldn't pay it back. The banks that had lent the money collapsed. The savers, businesses closed. People lost their jobs. They couldn't pay their rent, so were evicted. They went to the bank to take their savings out, but everyone was going to the bank at the same time. And the banks, well, they'd lent the money that the people had given them as their savings to other people who'd gone bust. The banks couldn't pay them back. The banks went bust. Everything went bust. To make matters worse, the rains failed in the Great Plains. There was a drought. So all the farmers who were hoping that they could sell their crops, there were no crops. The crops failed. The farmers had nothing. Their farms that should have been green were dust. And the farmers moved to California in search of work. But there was no work in California. Here are two pictures. One is men in New York queuing up to try and get food. And the picture on the right is the farmers moving from the Great Plains to California. They couldn't afford to get a bus or a train. They had no money. They had to walk long distances. America had to think of a way to deal with this. And President Roosevelt had an idea called the New Act. The New Act were measures to help people suffering from the Great Depression. Didn't happen till about 1933, but the New Deal was the government saying, actually, we are going to just print money and use that money to give people jobs. And so the New Deal gave the government the power to regulate the economy and to actually spend its own money, directly providing food, housing, financial security, giving social security, giving something for elderly and for people who are too sick to work. The New Deal also employed hundreds of thousands of men and women to start building dams, bridges, roads across the country. And their salaries helped to restart the economy. And their work meant that there were new dams, new bridges, new roads to help make America great again. The thing that really ended the Great Depression, it was on its way out before the World War II began, was World War II. War is an awful thing, but it does create jobs. Everyone had a job fighting or making weapons. And then after the war, the government again helped people with money, and people were so happy, just like at the end of World War I, to be free again and to enjoy the relief of peace, that they went out and spent it. And again, America boomed, but in a rather better managed way than they did after World War I. Right, we've got some example questions. Example questions 1 to 5. The United States trades with many countries. When the US sells goods and services to other countries, the value of the goods is recorded as exports. When the US buys goods and services from other countries, the value of those goods is recorded as imports. The trade balance is the value of each country's total exports to the United States minus the value of each country's total imports from the United States. A negative trade balance is called a trade deficit. That's important in GED, actually, to know what trade surplus is. Means that your exports are higher than your imports, and trade deficit means that your imports are higher than your exports. This table shows the value of the exports, imports, and trade balances for the top 5 largest trading partners of the United States in 2015. Values are given in billions of dollars. There it is. So Canada looks like they have a trade deficit of 35. China, a huge trade deficit of 343. Mexico, a trade deficit of 54. Japan, a trade deficit of 67, and Germany, a trade deficit of 74. Not looking very healthy for America, because it seems like they're importing rather more from all these countries than they are exporting. Now let's see what the question is. With which country does the United States have the smallest trade deficit? A, Canada, B, China, C, Mexico, or D, Germany? Well, it looks like it's Canada, because 35 is a smaller deficit than all the others. So the answer is A. According to the table, which of the following is a true statement? The United States buys the most goods and services from China and sells the most goods and services to Canada. B, the United States buys the most goods and services from Mexico and sells the most goods and services to China. C, the United States buys the most goods and services from Canada and sells the most goods and services to China. Or D, the United States buys the most goods and services from Germany and sells the most goods and services to Japan. Let's go through them one by one and see which one is true. So A, the United States buys the most goods and services from China and sells the most goods and services to Canada. Well, it certainly buys the most, 467 from China, and it looks like it sells the most to Canada. So I don't think we need to go very far. I think the answer to that one is A. The United States, but let's just check. B, the United States buys the most goods and services from Mexico. No, it doesn't. It buys the most goods and services from China. So we know B is not true. We don't even need to look at this. The United States buys the most goods and services from Canada and sells the most goods and services to China. Well, they don't buy the most from Canada. They buy the most from China. And they don't sell the most to China. They sell the most to Canada. So we know it's not that one. And D, the United States buys the most goods and services from Germany and sells the most goods and services to Japan. Well, they don't. They don't sell much to Germany compared to so they sell the least to Germany. So again, the answer to that is A. And the final one. Based on the given information, which of the following is an opinion rather than a factual statement? You don't need to know much about GED social services. You need to know here what the difference between opinion and fact is. Of the 5 partners, Germany buys the least amount of goods and services from the United States. Does that feel like a statement or an opinion? Feels to me like a statement. China has the largest trade deficit with the United States. Does that feel to you like an opinion or a factual statement? Feels to me like a factual statement. The United States should impose tariffs on Chinese goods in order to reduce the large trade deficit. Opinion. Should. My opinion is you should. Another person might say, well, actually, that's not fair. I mean, you know, you can't if you just need to find something to export to them, or you need to make it yourself. It's a should. It's an opinion. D, of the top 5 partners, Mexico has the second smallest trade deficit. Fact. So the answer to question 5 is C. Question 6, which of the following is the riskiest investment? Buying a stock in a single startup company, putting your money in a savings account at the bank, buying stock in several large established corporations, or D, putting your money in US government bonds. Well, the government, if anyone's going to pay you back, the US government's probably going to pay you back. So it's not D. C, well, a large established corporation is probably a safer place to buy stock than a small one. You know, if you were to buy stock in Apple, Google, Facebook, just a little bit in each, I think that would be rather safer than putting your money in a single startup company. It's an idea, hey, we're just new, we haven't really started trading yet, but hey, give us your money. That might be rather riskier than C. So we're now down to either A or B. Now, putting your money in a savings account at the bank in 1929 could have been quite risky because the bank could have gone bust, and a bank can go bust. And actually, your several large established corporations could go bust as well. And God forbid, the US government could go bust. But I would suggest that the bank is less likely to go bust than your single startup company. So I would say that the answer there is A. Question number 7. All of the following are valid reasons monopolies are not allowed to exist in the US, except... So A, monopolies are too efficient. B, monopolies prevent healthy competition. C, monopolies often give consumers fewer choices. Monopolies give too much power to one company. Well, too much power to one company, that's definitely true. They definitely give you fewer choices. You only got one choice. And they prevent healthy competition. Yes, they do. They don't want to have competition, so they try to own the whole space so that no one else can get in there. Monopolies are often very inefficient because there's no competition. They don't need to try very hard. So I would say it's A. So I hope that economics is now a little bit less scary for you.